Eye Contact, a Mark Manning Mystery, Book 2. Author, Michael Kraft. Publisher, Open Road Integrated Media, New York. Narrator, Eric Ost. Saturday, July 3rd. Manning hurls the paper onto the bed. It's noon already. It took all morning for an inept room service staff to get a paper up to him, and when it arrived, he found his story buried on page 5, altered beyond recognition. He looks around him. The hotel room is cramped and sparsely furnished, but it's clean and new. In fact, he's probably the first guest to stay here. It was an expensive night, $300 for himself, another $300 for Arlen Farber. The desk clerk refused to allow 2 men to share one room. Since Manning registered under a false name, he couldn't use a credit card, so his wallet is running on empty. He doesn't normally carry so much cash, but he was prepared for a weekend that would be filled with uncertainties. Last evening at the planetarium, after Manning filed his story attempting to expose Nathan Kane as a murderer, he and Farber decided that neither of them would be safe at home that night. Manning could at least find scant consolation in the fact that Neil was staying with Roxanne. He was out of harm's way. Nonetheless, Manning phoned Roxanne's apartment for the planetarium and left a cryptic message for Neil, cautioning him to stay away from the loft. Manning and Farber decided they should find a hotel. No easy feat with the world converging on the city for the festival, but Manning had a hunch, which turned out to be correct. The Gethsemane Arms Hotel was already surrounded with controversy because of its owners, because of the protest march to be staged there, because of its exorbitant rates. So there were plenty of vacant rooms. The Gethsemane also struck Manning as the perfect hideaway, as no one would think to look for him there, of all places. So Manning counted out $600 to the desk clerk. Brotherhood and trust are one thing, but hotel policy is another, requiring payment in advance. Then he retired to his room, needing sleep. Before parting ways with Farber in the hall, he asked the other man to come to his room around noon. Manning slept, but he's not feeling rested. Yesterday was easily the worst day of his life. Neil walked out on him. Hector Bosch publicly humiliated him and threatened his career. His friend and co-worker, David Bosch, was murdered by their boss, who had already killed another reporter. And the victim of this latest treachery was meant to be Manning himself. What's more, he learned that Nathan Kane is the guiding force behind a complicated scheme with enormously high stakes that Manning cannot begin to fathom. All these disjointed, deadly details are pointing toward a foreboding climax. But what, when, and where? The 10th Planet scam is somehow related to the secretly planned Sky Show, and both seem related, by virtue of their timing, to the opening of the festival. So, Manning has 3 pieces to the puzzle: the Planet scam, the Sky Show, the festival. But a 4th piece is missing. He knows from experience that it's out there. It's been there all along, close enough to bite him. But he needs a clue, just one more clue to complete the picture and reveal the hidden motive behind Kane's machinations. These are the questions, the circular thoughts that bubbled through Manning's subconsciousness as he slept, preyed on him the moment he awoke, and now obsess him as he paces the confines of the hotel room. He has switched on the television, hoping for distraction, wondering whether the story of David's murder has broken yet. But the hotel's cable system delivers only good, decent, sanitized Christian programming. 50-some channels of it. Manning's search for news of current events is reduced to a frustrating bout of zapper surfing. Dismayed by the fact that his story in the journal was spiked, he might have guessed it would happen, and he's not sure who did it or how, but he's got a theory. Manning decides that he'd better tell the police what he knows. If his story as written had made headlines, an arrest would already have been made, or at least a manhunt would be underway. But his tampered-with story was drivel, so he needs to inform the police directly. Manning is dressed, ready as he can for the unpredictable events that will shape this day. He removes his cell phone from the inside pocket of his blazer, which hangs from the back of a desk chair. Sitting, he punches the same programmed number that he called on the night when he discovered Nolan's body. His detective friend will listen, will believe Manning, will know how to handle the situation. The other phone rings too long. When someone finally answers, Manning says, "Jim?" But it's someone else. It's Saturday. The president's plane is due to land. There are dignitaries all over the city. Throngs are already converging on the stadium, and a major demonstration is about to be staged by a bunch of religious wackos. In a word, the police are busy. Jim's not in. No one knows when to expect him. But this is important. Manning insists. Can I leave him a message? And Manning finds himself instantly connected to Jim's voicemail. He tries to keep it brief, giving all the details he can before he's cut off by a beep. Rattled, Manning hangs up the phone, not knowing if or when Jim will get his message. Returning his attention to the television, he zaps an old rerun of a Billy Graham crusade and lands to his amazement in the middle of a local newscast. Manning turns up the sound on a cap-toothed talking head with big hair. Racing to put finishing touches on the stadium grounds in preparation for the president's visit. Then the head frowns. On a tragic note, the lifeless body of a young man was discovered this morning atop the Mid-America building near one of the 3 projectors that would be used to create tonight's sky spectacle. The victim's identity has not been released, pending notification of his family. He suffered a single bullet wound to his back. A routine ballistics test will be conducted. There was no apparent motive for the murder. The head smiles again. Don't even ask about tickets for this afternoon's opening ceremonies. There are none to be had, and the mayor's office warns the public to beware of scalpers. Widespread reports of counterfeit passes. There's a knock at the door. Manning mutes the sound of the newscast, rises from his chair at the desk, and crosses the few steps to the door. Swinging it open, he says, "Good morning, Professor." As Arlen Farber slips inside, Manning corrects himself. Or rather, good afternoon. I'm sorry I'm late. I couldn't sleep. Farber looks terrible. Unshaven, unkempt. Some ratty tweed jacket. He wears the chain around his neck with the keys and the whistle. Still in costume? Manning asks him. Well, the act is over. Farber glances at the stuff hanging on his chest. He forces a smile. Just a habit, I guess. Besides, I don't have a key ring. Some of these are real, not props. He rattles the chain, then sits heavily on the bed. Crumpling the newspaper, Manning thinks of something. On the topic of props, he says, I'm curious, that whole setup in your lab at the planetarium, the computers and all the electronics, that's just set dressing, right? Hardly, Farber tells him. Sure, the equipment I used for the graphic realization was pure theater, a VCR, a monitor, and a few cabinets rigged up with blinking lights and fake dials, but to the best of my knowledge, which is admittedly limited, all the rest of that stuff is genuine. It's strictly off limits. I was instructed never to touch it. Manning's brow furrows. What's it used for? Farber shrugs. Ask Nathan Kane. I was there every day for a month, basically locked in the lab, twiddling my thumbs and watching movies, and I never once saw anyone go near all that equipment. But it does get used, somehow. Now and then it fires up on its own, grinds away for a while, and then shuts down again. There's no rhyme or reason. Let me tell you, it still makes me jump, and it's annoying as hell in the middle of a good flick. And he sits at the desk, drumming his fingers in thought. Let's go back and have a look. By now, everyone who tried to find us there knows that we're somewhere else. Once the ceremony is underway, we'll be as safe at the lab as anywhere. Farber is weary. Can we eat first? Actually, I could use a drink. Manning laughs, rising from his chair. Well, let's pop downstairs. It ought to be quiet in the lobby. The crazed masses are outside in the street, gathering with their torches in defense of marriage. The family and heterosex. Finding some lunch should be no problem, but you're out of luck with the booze. Christ may have turned water into wine, but the Gethsemane arms is dry as a bone. Shit, Farber heaves a sigh. What's with these people? Good question. Manning slips his jacket on. After we eat, let's come back upstairs to freshen up before we check out. Ready? Sure. Farber stands, then he sees something on television. Hey, look, he says, pointing. I know that guy. It's Elder Buckman. He's the chief goon at this joint. He and some of his boys interviewed me on Tuesday. What a prick. I heard about that, says Manning. I know someone else who was there. He turns up the sound. Buckman is talking to a reporter live outside the hotel. So the purpose of our gathering today is to express, in the strongest terms possible, our revulsion with all this special treatment being accorded to homosexuals. We're especially distraught that the President of the United States has added his own voice to these perverted pleas for tolerance. With the good Lord marching at our side, we're determined to stop all such politicians in their tracks. The reporter asked, "Wouldn't your march have greater impact if you staged it near the stadium?" The mayor's office has cordoned off a special area for such protests. "We're safer here on our own turf," Buckman tells him. "There's no telling what those people are capable of." "Come now, Elder Buckman, security has never been tighter," Manning tells Farber. "I've heard enough. Let's eat." He walks to the door and opens it. Farber follows, stepping into the hall. Manning says, "Now tell me about that meeting you had with Buckman." And he closes the door behind them. Inside the room, Elder Burlington, Buckman, still blusters on the television. Having grabbed the microphone from the reporter's hand, he leans toward the lens, spouting through an evangelical drawl. "And the work of the crusade, the work of Jesus, has flourished here in Chicago, thanks to the selfless efforts of so many fine local citizens. Our legions of contributors are too vast to name. But there is one man who must be mentioned with a note of special recognition. Without his guidance, influence, and, yes, his extraordinary financial assistance, the Christian Family Crusade could not have won this beachhead in the North. We thank you, Nathan Kane, and may God bless you." Gay Mysteries audiobooks. I think it is easy to hate a label, but a face humanizes the word. So this effort is twofold: to offer comfort to those like myself that your world didn't end because you don't fit into the view of acceptable society on both sides, and in hopes of helping those with family that are LGBTQ, that it doesn't mean we are aliens from the child they once knew. Reassure them so they can maybe be supportive at the same time, being true to their values.